food industry in the United
Okay, so basically I'm going to talk today a little bit about I'm calling it the American food landscape. So these are contemporary issues in the production and consumption of food in America. So there are a lot of issues with food in America right now, but I don't have time to talk about all of them. So we're just going to kind of focus on agricultural problems today. So there are other problems like with obesity, I'm sure you've heard, and changes in the American diet in general, like children are eating too much sugar, and it's not good for them, and just some problems with ingredients that are put into our food, but we're going to leave that out of the picture today and talk more about like agricultural problems. So today our topics are going to be genetically modified crops, factory farming, and some of the food movements that have kind of sprung up in response to these things. So first we're going to talk about genetically modified organisms. So have you guys ever heard of a genetically modified organism? Do you know what that is? So it's like the crop that they've gone in and changed the DNA. So it's so they kind of change the DNA to select for some trait that they want to appear in the crop. So it's not natural food. They're changing it. So basically, so it's like, for example, there's this really famous kind that's called BT corn. So BT corn is the kind of corn that kind of contains a bacterial gene that produces crystals that are lethal to insect larvae. So basically it's producing its own pesticide. So this corn has genes from bacteria that kills insects. And because of that, the corn itself will kill insects if it's eaten. So that effectively reduces the need to use pesticides, like chemicals, to prevent bugs from eating these crops. So that's an example of a genetically modified crop. So the most commonly genetically modified organisms in America are soybeans and corn. Cotton is another big one, but it's mostly soybeans and corn. So right now America is kind of the leading user of genetically modified crops. So of all genetically modified crops in the world, America has 45% of them, followed by Brazil, which has 17%, Argentina with 15%, India with 6%, Canada with 6%, China with 2%, and then there's about 3% that goes to other random countries. But these are the main countries that use GMOs, so that's genetically modified organisms. Okay, so in America, this is basically genetically modified crops have been on the table for about 15 years now. So over time, they've become more and more popular. And now it's estimated that about 75% of processed food in America contains ingredients that have GMOs. So in tomato sauce, for example, maybe the tomatoes were genetically modified. But the U.S. doesn't require these products to be labeled, so you can't just look at a product and know that it was a genetically modified organism. So even if you're buying fruit directly, there's no need for that to be labeled. It's not required by our law. So that's unfortunate. So this is a graph that kind of shows the growth of genetically modified crops in the U.S. over the past about 15 years. So you can see it started out about 15 years ago it started to become popular, and then over time it's grown significantly. So there's a large percentage of crops that are genetically modified in America right now. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the pros and cons of genetically modified crops. So there is a reason that people do this, even though there are a lot of negative aspects to it. So first we'll talk about the pros, the good things, the reasons people have created these crops. So first of all, as I said, you can alter these crops to have certain traits. So for example, you can create plants that will resist insects. So as we talked about BT corn, so they resist insects from eating them, and they might be more resistant to disease. So if there's some kind of disease sweeping through crops and destroying everything, like for example, about 2 years ago we had a tomato blight in the Northeast, so all the tomatoes were destroyed. So if they genetically modified those tomatoes to kind of be resistant to that tomato blight, that wouldn't have happened, and farmers wouldn't have lost their crop to this blight. Sometimes genetically modified organisms can be modified to resist drought. or cold, so that they can grow in more conditions. And so basically you can see how some of these things would be good alterations to a plant, because it might reduce the need for pesticides, which leads to pollution, because when pesticides are used, sometimes they get into water sources and pollute them. And then also, some people argue that genetically modified crops are useful because they can reduce hunger or famine in the world. So by preventing crops from being destroyed by droughts or diseases, some farmers in countries where they have these problems would be more likely to get their full crop, and people wouldn't go hungry. So then also, like these effects can be achieved to some extent through normal natural breeding, but genetically modified crops are faster and more accurate in like isolating these traits that are desirable. So that's a positive aspect. And then also there are some other things that can be selected for in genetically modified crops that might have positive effects. So for example, it's possible to improve the nutritional content of some foods. So more vitamins or vitamins that aren't supposed to be in certain foods can be inserted. Also, it's possible, some scientists are working on research right now about creating edible vaccinations. So there are diseases that humans are susceptible to, right? So instead of injections, it might be possible to get these injections through food, so just eat these vaccinations pretty much. So it would be less expensive to do that because you can grow lots of them. Whereas producing one injection is a lot more expensive. Also, it's possible to grow genetically modified crops to kind of clean up the environment, so they would work against pollution. So, for example, you could genetically modify a tree to kind of suck up like heavy metal in soil, so clean up polluted soil. That's possible too. So there are positives, but there are a lot of negatives as well. So first of all, one concern is that genetically modified crops can harm other organisms. So not all insects are trying to eat the crops, right? There are some who are innocent, I will say. They're minding their own business, they're eating other foods, like weeds. Do you know what a weed is? Like it's just like some plant that grows between the crops, and farmers don't want them there, so they take the weeds out. So you probably weed in your gardens, right? So basically, maybe they're insects that are just eating these weeds, so they're not harming the crops. But because these pesticides that are kind of grown inside of the crops don't distinguish between insects, they just kill all the insects. If pollen from these crops gets onto other plants, those innocent insects could also be killed. So that kind of mess with the food chain, right? So they don't want to kill insects that aren't actually harming the crops. You can isolate pests. So that's a problem. Then there's also this problem that the effectiveness of pesticides can be reduced. So basically insects can develop a resistance to these crops, and then be able to eat them, and then we'll be stuck because we don't have crops that these insects can't eat. So that can be a problem. And then also, some people are worried about gene transfer. So basically that these genetically modified crops would breed with other crops and create two different problems. So one would be super weed. So I just told you what a weed is. So a super weed is a weed that you can't destroy because it would share some of the same qualities that these crops do. So it would be harder to get rid of them with pesticides, basically. The other problem is that sometimes, there's one farmer who has genetically modified organisms in his field, so we'll say like he has BT corn. And then the farmer next door has normal organic corn that is not genetically modified. Those corn can still cross-pollinate, and the farmer who didn't have genetically modified organisms might one day find that he does have them in his field, just by accident because of normal pollination processes. Do you understand that? So a farmer who didn't mean to have genetically modified crops winds up with them because the plants have bred. So this is a problem because basically a genetically modified organism, a GM crop, is patented, right? Do you know what patented means? Like, it means there's a copyright on it. Copyright, so the seed, it's not natural. So the people who, so companies that create these genetically modified organisms, it's their scientific effort that created them, so they have ownership. And if other people use them without permission, then they can sue them, they can get them in trouble. So these farmers who wind up with genetically modified crops in their fields by accident get in trouble with the law because the companies think that they're stealing their seeds. You understand? So there are problems with patent infringement because these seeds can spread and get innocent farmers in trouble. So that's another problem. And then another problem is just the general effects on human health. So first is this issue of allergens. Do you know what an allergy is? An allergy. So basically, because you're combining different crops together, different plants together, and if you put a gene from a crop that someone's allergic to into another crop, they don't know that's there, and they could have an allergic reaction to the crop they're not used to having an allergic reaction to. So, for example, recently it was proposed that soybeans, a certain brand of soybean, be injected with the genes from something called a Brazil nut. So a lot of people have allergies to nuts. So if someone goes and eats a soybean, like some soy product, and it has that nut gene in it, it's possible that they would have an allergic reaction, and they wouldn't know that because these products aren't labeled. So that's another problem. And then also people are just in general concerned about the health effects of genetically modified organisms. So far there haven't really been any that have shown themselves. So it's been about 15 years, and there don't seem to be any problems that people are experiencing health-wise from eating genetically modified crops. However, some people argue that that's too little time to make a judgment about that. So maybe it's going to take a lifetime for these effects to manifest themselves in someone's body. So maybe you have to get old before it shows, before these damages come to the surface. So basically, a lot of people argue that there just hasn't been enough research about these genetically modified crops. And basically our government has approved these crops because no negative effects are showing themselves, but people want there to be more testing done first. And then there are some economic concerns that, like a lot of these genetically modified organisms, like people are saying that it's great because it can help world hunger. We can give them to people who, have drought, like maybe countries in Africa that experience a lot of drought and have trouble producing a good crop. But there's also concern that because these are patented, because they're copyrighted, these companies can sell these seeds for exorbitant amounts of money that wouldn't be affordable by these farmers who need them the most. So there are economic concerns as well, economic justice. And then finally, there's a very large concern about diversity. So basically, if we are planting one species of this crop, like one strand of this crop, and interbreeding it, and selecting for these traits, over time, that one species is going to be promoted and it's going to dominate the market. And then we're going to have a smaller genetic pool, so that our plants are going to be more susceptible to disease, and they might have lower nutritional value and things like that. So it's really important to maintain a large genetic pool in crops. And people are concerned that with genetically modified crops that wouldn't happen. Okay, so then I want to talk to you a little bit about a company called Monsanto, which is a very large agricultural biotechnology company in America. So they're very involved in genetically modified crops. They've done a lot of other things too. They've been around for about 100 years, and they've been involved in the production of a lot of really controversial chemicals. So they produce a lot of artificial sweeteners, such as saccharin and aspartame. Have you ever heard of either of those? So there are questions about whether these artificial sweeteners are good for people. They've also produced some plastics and industrial chemicals, lots of herbicides, including DDT. Have you ever heard of DDT? It's an herbicide that's very dangerous, and it was taken off of the market about 40 years ago. So not taken off the market, but the American government banned it, so it's not allowed to be used in America anymore. So people use it in secret for a while, but it's very dangerous chemical, so it's not allowed anymore. They also produced a defoliant called Agent Orange. Have you ever heard of Agent Orange? It's a chemical used in warfare, so it was used in the Vietnam War to kind of take the leaves off the trees. And basically it had a lot of negative health effects for people who were exposed to it, soldiers and Vietnamese people who were exposed to Agent Orange. They've also been involved in creation of growth hormones, nuclear weapons, and of course genetic modification, which is what we're going to focus on mainly with Monsanto. So their main herbicide that they produce is called Roundup. So it's an herbicide that kills weeds. So what are the other plants that are not crops that are getting in the way and taking up sunlight, this herbicide kills them. So along with this herbicide called Roundup, they've kind of genetically engineered seeds to be resistant to this pesticide. So if the pesticide is sprayed on them, the crops themselves won't be killed. Does that make sense? So these genetically engineered seeds are called Roundup Ready. So they're ready for Roundup herbicide to be sprayed on them. So I talked to you a bit about the problems with the farmers who get genetically modified crops in their fields by accident. So Monsanto is one of those companies that is prosecuting these farmers for having their seeds in their fields. So one of the solutions that people have proposed for this is something called a terminator seed. So a terminator seed is basically a seed that it prevents the spread of that crop. So a terminator seed will grow one round of crops, and then after that it will produce seeds, but those seeds will be sterile. So a lot of farmers save their seeds, right? So after one growing cycle is over, they'll save their seeds and plant them the next season. But terminator seeds wouldn't let you do that because they would be sterile, because they can't grow new plants. So that would effectively stop seeds from spreading into other fields, right? So that's a good thing. But on the other hand, terminator seeds are seen as a problem by many people because basically it would increase the dependency of small farmers on seed companies because they would have to keep buying these seeds year after year. Does that make sense? So if you can't save your seeds, you have to keep buying new seeds every year. And because again it's patented, it's copyrighted, the company can charge whatever they want for it, pretty much. So that's a problem too. So most people didn't like this idea of terminator seeds. So in 1999, Monsanto, in response to that, pledged that they were not going to commercialize this terminator seed technology. So they said that we're not going to have a business that involves these terminator seeds. We're not going to produce them. So at the same time, there was this other company called Delta and Pine Company. In 2000, their vice president, Harry Collins, said, "We've continued right on with work on the technology protection system," which is the terminator seed project. "We never really slowed down. We're on target, moving ahead to commercialize it. We never really backed off." So this company, their focus is terminator seeds. They produce terminator seeds. Then 7 years later, in 2007, Monsanto acquired that company. So the fact that Monsanto acquired a company that was focused on terminator seed technology kind of indicates that it is planning to go ahead and commercialize that technology, even though it says it isn't. So that's the thing with Monsanto. So generally, I talked to you already about just this general fear of genetically modified organisms. And the fact that they might have unknown health effects on humans, and people want more testing to be done. But Monsanto replied that Monsanto should not have to vouchsafe the safety of biotech food. Our interest is in selling as much of it as possible. Assuring its safety is the FDA's job. The FDA is the Food and Drug Administration, which kind of regulates the safety of food in America. So Monsanto is saying that it's not our job to decide whether our food is safe. The FDA can do that. We just want to make money. That's basically what they're saying. So, sort of questionable company. That's enough about genetically modified foods. We're going to move on and talk a little bit about factory farming now. Have you ever heard of the term factory farming? Anyone? A little bit? So basically, factory farming is a method of farming that isn't exactly the way you picture farming, I guess. Like, you normally think of, like, you know, rolling fields, and they're green, and there are cows everywhere. Factory farming is a little bit different because basically its goal is to produce as much food as possible for as small of a cost as they can. So that means that they don't want to spend as much money on land and space, and it's more cost effective to crowd animals together, basically. So usually livestock is raised in confinement, so very small spaces, often inside. They never see daylight, they never get to go outside, they never get to run around, eat grass. They have to stay inside, often in cages, all day long. So it's not quite humane, but basically most of the products that are produced by factory farming are meat and eggs and milk, so animal products. So these are some pictures of factory farming, not very pretty. So you can see this is indoors. There are 3 levels of chickens, and they have their own little cages, and it's dark and looks dirty. So it's pretty horrible, basically. And then these are like pigs in equally horrible conditions, like they don't have any space to move or anything. So basically, those are just a couple examples. There are many different kinds of factory farms. Sometimes they have more space to move. Sometimes they aren't in cages, but they're still inside and overcrowded. So clearly, just from looking at those pictures, obviously we have a lot of ethical concerns with factory farming. So first of all, the housing is inappropriate, obviously, and a lot of times, not just the fact that it's very overcrowded and too tight, but the fact that animals can be hurt by the housing that they live in, so inappropriate conditions. Because animals are confined, it prevents them from normal behavior. So chickens are accustomed to like perching and making nests and things like that, but they aren't able to do that because they're stuck in cages all day. So because of some of these things, because they're confined, overcrowded, in a noisy and confused atmosphere, not able to act as they normally would, there's a lot of social stress and just stress in general that these animals experience. So that's a big problem. Because animals are so overcrowded, it's very easy for disease to break out and spread from animal to animal very quickly. So in order to combat this disease, a lot of factory farms feed the animals antibiotics, regardless of whether they need them or not, just to prevent them from getting sick. So it's not good to be fed antibiotics when you don't need them, and generally they're at levels that are much too high. Then there are a lot of inhumane practices with the animals themselves. So for example, chickens are de-beaked. Do you know what a beak is? It's like their beak. They cut their beaks off so they can't peck at each other because they're so crowded and they're so stressed out that they're going to be pecking at each other. It's normal chicken behavior. So in order to keep them from harming each other, they cut off their beaks. Sometimes animals are also force-fed because one of the main concerns of these factory farmers is that they're making really big fat chickens, right? They're making a lot of food for very little money. So they want to get them to be as fat as possible, as quickly as possible. So they feed them too much, and they're feeding them the wrong thing too. So cows are supposed to eat grass, but they're fed corn instead. It's not good for their digestive system. It's not what they're supposed to be eating, but it fattens them up faster. So that's why they do it. Then there's also a practice of forced molting, in which chickens they're effectively starved for 2 weeks to kind of trick the body into molting, shedding all of its feathers, which kind of prepares the chicken to go through another reproductive cycle and lay more eggs faster. So they're starving chickens, so they're going to lay eggs again more quickly. So these are obviously really inhumane practices. It's not good at all. Then, as I said, one of their main concerns is to fatten up the animals as quickly as possible. So one thing that they do is they use hormones. Have you ever heard of what a hormone is? Okay, good. So hormones, basically hormones are given to these animals to cause them to grow faster, so that they get fatter faster, they get more mature faster. And this is often a horrible thing because, well, first of all, those hormones stay in their body and they're not supposed to be there. And secondly, because, for example, some chickens are fed hormones, and they get too fat too quickly for their bone structure to keep up. So their bones can't support the weight of their body, and they can't stand up. So just some chickens will fall down and pretty much get trampled by other chickens. So it's really, really horrible. And with all of this, it's not surprising that there's reduced longevity. So animals live shorter lifetimes because of all of this. Okay, so it's all really dark stuff. But also there are some other concerns with factory farming, so environmental and human health concerns. So some of the environmental concerns are with resources and pollution. So basically, factory farms use a lot of resources, and they use about 8% of the water in the world, fresh water in the world. That all goes to animal agriculture, and about 1/3 of the grain that's produced each year goes to that as well. So basically, those are a lot of resources that could be going to other things. There are people in the world who need that water and grain. So a lot of, we'll talk about this in a bit, but a lot of vegetarians and vegans use one of the reasons for not eating meat or animal products is that it would make a lot more sense for the grain that goes to those animals to go to people instead, because a lot of energy is lost through feeding all that grain to animals. So you could make more food by just eating the grain straight, eating vegetables. So that's the resource problem. And there are also problems with pollution because animals are not being fed the correct things. So there's a lot of nitrogen emission in their excrement. So that all runs off into the water supply and pollutes the water supply and kills fish and things like that. And then also it goes into the atmosphere and adds the problem of global warming. So there's a pollution issue as well. And then again with human health, some diseases can be transferred from animals to humans. So these diseases that are running rampant in these factory farms can be transferred to the humans that eat them. And that's obviously a pretty bad thing. Also with antibiotics and growth hormones that are present in these animals' bodies, those are also kind of transferred to humans. So sometimes those can have negative effects on humans. So for example, Monsanto, I told you they created a growth hormone for cows. So it's called RBGH. So it's recombinant bovine growth hormone. So basically it's a hormone that increases the milk production of cows. So it's a synthetic hormone that stimulates the production of a natural hormone called IGF-1. So IGF-1 is a hormone that is in the milk of mothers. So it's good for infants. Infants are supposed to get that hormone. But when that hormone is consumed by adults, it works as a cancer accelerator. You know what cancer is, right? So sometimes hormones have very negative effects on human health. So that's a big concern of some people. All right. So the next one, talk to you about food labeling. So because of these, I was just telling you about these hormone problems, the hormones in milk. Because of problems like that, there are people who have organic milk companies that don't have hormones, and they want to label their milk hormone-free, so that people will know that our milk has no hormones and it's safe to drink. So some companies like Monsanto have acted against this because they think that it's making them look bad, because they believe that they have the right to use a technology that maximizes their profit. So that's what their hormone does. It maximizes their profit by making more milk. And they think that when other people say that we don't have this hormone in our milk, it makes them look bad and decreases their sales. So that's the problem. A lot of companies will try to prevent other organic companies from labeling their products as not having these potentially harmful products or ingredients. Then a lot of foods are sometimes labeled natural, but natural really means nothing. So a lot of people will see all natural on some kind of product in the store, and they'll think, oh great, this is healthy for me. But anyone can put natural on their products because there's no government regulation about it. So it can mean anything. So people have to be aware of which labels actually mean something in American supermarkets. Another label that doesn't mean all that much is cage-free. So I told you about cages in factory farms. So for example, chickens. are often kept in cages. So you might buy a carton of eggs, and it will say cage-free on it. And a lot of people think, oh great, these chickens are running around free in the grassland. They weren't. They might not have been because cage-free just means they're not in cages. It doesn't mean they're outside. It doesn't mean they have a lot of space and freedom. So like one woman went to go investigate one of these cage-free egg facilities, and this is what she said about it. She said, the floor under my feet was cement, and the building was freezing cold with no heat in early April. I couldn't see much for hens at all down the shed. It was just too dark. All I could see was black. All I could hear was crying of hens. All I could smell was ammonia. It was a cold, black cement hell. Does that sound like a nice place for a chicken to be? So it's cold and dark, like the chickens are cold, and they can't see anything, they're crowded in. It's not like a very, even though it's cage-free, it's not necessarily a good atmosphere for animals to be raised in. And so you have to be careful in America when you read your label, like what is actually telling you. Okay, so actually one label that does mean something in America, we'll talk about this a bit later, is organic. So organic means that there were no chemicals used in the production of that product. So sometimes there's a way to tell what's organic and what's genetically modified in America, but you can't always tell. So basically we have something called a PLU code. So it's a price lookup code. So it's how when you take your purchases up to the cashier, that's how she checks your purchases and how much they cost. So all these products, fruits and vegetables have a PLU, like a number, and some of them are 4 digits, and some of them are 5 digits. So the 4-digit ones, you can't know anything about these fruits. So this apple, these kiwis, we don't know. We don't know what they are. Maybe they're organic, maybe they're genetically modified, maybe they have pesticides on them. We don't know that. But if the number is 5 digits, then you can tell the difference. Because an organic fruit will start with 5 digits, or will be 5 digits starting with a 9, the number 9. And a genetically modified product will also be 5 digits, but starting with the number 8, right here. So that is one way to tell the difference, but the trouble is it's not law yet that you have to show whether you are genetically modified or not. So only some products will actually have those numbers on them. So most people think that it's just best to try and buy organic as much as possible because you can know when something's organic, because it's there's regulation around that term, and you can't just put the name organic on anything. So sometimes people believe it's best to just buy everything organic, and then you know that you're safe. Alright, so now we're going to talk about, on a slightly lighter note, some of the food movements that are kind of acting against some of these horrible things I told you about. The first is this organization called Slow Food. Has anyone ever heard of Slow Food? So basically, it's a reaction to fast food. Do you know what fast food is? So like McDonald's and things like that. So a place where you've been running, you get food for really cheap, and you get it really quickly. So basically, slow food doesn't believe that that's right, because fast food doesn't have the best ingredients. It's not necessarily healthy food or good food, and oftentimes people eat it completely alone, so like on the run, by themselves. So slow food is emphasizing that the community aspect of food is also really important. So food should be part of the community. You should buy it locally. So the food should be grown nearby. It should be seasonable. So you should buy foods that are grown in that season. So if it's autumn, you should be buying autumn food, not like spring food. So they're emphasizing that too, and having a diverse diet. So eating lots of different things and not just a couple ingredients. So their motto is good, clean, and fair food for all. And they support small scale, like not big factories, like small farms, and sustainable food practices. So environmentally friendly practices with food. Then there's another organization called Seed Savers, which kind of is a reaction against genetically modified seeds. So basically, they're supporting the genetic diversity of seeds. So this group of people is concerned that the genetic pool of all these different crops is going to become too small. So what they do is they save their seeds. So when they grow a crop, they save all the seeds, and then it all goes in a magazine, and people can order seeds from other people and increase their gardens, put new things in their gardens. So people are saving their seeds and exchanging them. So what they're trying to do is save the heritage of North American seeds. So all these old varieties of seeds that have been around for like hundreds of years, people keep saving them so that they're still going to be around, instead of letting them die out. So they're concerned with maintaining the diversity of the genetic pool. So they pledge that they do not knowingly buy or sell genetically engineered seeds or plants. So they want all natural things. Alright, and then so I talked to you a bit about what organic means. So one really large movement in America is the organic movement. So basically, like again, organic food is grown without the use of chemicals or pesticides or fertilizers, things like that. So it is a little harder to grow that way because they don't use like synthetic nitrogen to help their plants grow more easily. And because of these additional difficulties in growing, sometimes organic food costs more money. So some people don't have access to organic food. But generally, organic food is local and seasonal. This is a picture of a farmer's market, which is becoming a lot more popular in America. Markets where you see the big organic banner, people are selling organic foods. So things they've grown at home in small farms with no chemicals. Okay, and then so again, I told you about organic labeling. So there are certain restrictions on labeling organic things. You can't just put that label on anything. USDA says that consumers buying organic products can be assured that the foods are produced without antibiotics, hormones, pesticides, irradiation, or bioengineering. So all those things we talked about aren't in organic food. Also, they have certain standards for the humane treatment of animals and the conservation of water and soil. So there are really big fines if you deceive people. You put an organic label on something that's not organic. You can pay up to $10,000 for each time you do it. So no one wants to mess with that. Okay, and I told you a little bit about vegetarian and vegan diets. Basically, some people adopt special diets in response to these problems in the American agricultural industry. So some people become, so did you know these terms? A vegetarian eats no meat or fish. A vegan eats no meat or fish, also doesn't eat any eggs or milk, so no animal products. And so basically, we'll get to low carb in a second. Vegetarians and vegans kind of, they forego these animal products in response to farming practices often. There are a lot of reasons to become vegetarian or vegan, but one really large motivator for people is that farming practices are inhumane and they're not friendly to the environment. They don't want hormones in their bodies. They don't want diseases from these animals. And there are a lot of, like, all the concerns that we talked about with factory farming, like basically they're avoiding that by not eating animals at all. And again, the environmental concerns of all that water and grain that goes to animals and to be going to people instead. Then there's a locavore, which basically is a person who limits himself to eating seasonal and local food. So food that's grown within like his area, the country, so he's not importing bananas from Ecuador or anything like that. He'd just be eating like potatoes and carrots and whatever grows in the Northeast, for example, of America. Nothing else. And again, eating food that's seasonal, so whatever's growing at that time of year. And a lot of people become locavores in response to fossil fuel waste. So when exotic foods from like South America are transported to North America, that costs a lot of money, right? And it uses a lot of fuel to send these planes back and forth carrying all these products. So if there's an average of exotic foods, like foods that are not grown locally, travel an average of 1,500 miles. So how many kilometers is that, geez? I don't know, but it's a long way basically. So it travels a long way to get somewhere. And every year, 30,800 tons of greenhouse gas emissions come from transporting these foods back and forth. So that's why people become locavores. Alright, and then that's pretty much it. But if you're interested in any of these issues, these are some really good books and documentaries that have been produced on these issues. So a lot of people are reading these books and watching these movies in America right now. So I think people are starting to kind of wise up to what's going on in our food industry. So hopefully things are going to change. But that's it. So if you have any questions now, I'm happy to answer them.
My question is about terminating this. What kind of foods do people get from terminating this?
I think it could be for a lot of different kinds of crops. I think it really could be any crops, like maybe corn or soybeans or cotton. So it's pretty much anything. Like it's just the fact that the seed will not produce after the first round.
I've heard it for the first time. Terminating.
Oh, you've heard that for the first time? Yeah, I think no one actually uses that technology yet, but it's in the works. So people are developing that technology right now, and it might come to the market sometime soon. So.
About organic foods. Are there many organic foods in USA?
Yeah, if you go to the right places, so like farmers markets have a lot of organic food, for example. Like generally, farmers markets you can expect it to be organic. In the grocery store, like I had this picture. A lot of foods are labeled organic. So if that label's on it, you can be sure that it is. So, and certain stores sell more organic foods than others do. But generally, yeah, if you want organic food, you can buy it. Just the only problem is it can be kind of expensive. So, because it just costs more to make it. And I think farmers, when they have to become certified, their farm has to be certified that it's organic. So that involves them having to pay some money for that too. So that adds to the cost also. Them paying for their certification, so that you can know that you're eating safe food.
How do you feel about an opinion that if anybody won't eat some genetically modified food, and there won't be some bad consequences for him. But if we are young and we eat these foods, we will see bad effects of genetic modification in our children.
I don't know. I hope not. I'm not sure that would happen. Like, I don't really know the science behind it, but I'm not sure it's possible. But I think the health effects they're more concerned about are maybe like cancer, like diseases that can be exaggerated by eating these products. So they're unknown basically. Like the health consequences the potential health consequences are unknown. So far there have been no problems. So I guess what you're saying is possible, but I really hope not. I'm pretty sure I've eaten genetically modified food without knowing. So
there are some people who really think that genetically modified foods can affect not on the person, but not on the human who eats this food, but on his organs, which will
organs?
Which will born children.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that's definitely true. That's definitely I think that's definitely a possibility that if you eat one of these foods, it may have a negative health effect on some of your organs, like maybe your reproductive system, and that can change the way your children develop in the womb. I think that is a possibility for sure. So, is that what you're trying to say? Pretty much. And yeah, that's definitely, I think that could be a concern. I think that's what people are scared of. It's no one's proved that that's possible yet, but no one's proved that it isn't possible. So people are scared.
I think that we're lucky people because we live here and are really, I think it's nature
Yeah.
Only eggs, everything is natural. But sometimes very stupid when girls, for example, I know a girl, she doesn't eat domestic eggs. Eggs really become good suitable children. She eats just eggs from shops, and she buys it in the shops, because she thinks that eggs from the shops, she buys from in the shops. It's a yellow thing in the egg. I don't know how to call it.
The yolk?
Yeah.
That's always there.
It's not too yellow. She doesn't like very yellow, and eggs will be very yellow.
So the eggs that you grow at home they have very yellow yolk.
Yeah.
That's really funny.
Eggs, domestic eggs, they are too yellow and they are dirty.
Yeah, the feathers on them. That's interesting. So, but the eggs that you buy in the store here, do you think that those are probably pretty safe for her to eat too? Do you think, or like, are you concerned about how those are raised? Or do you know anything about how how animals are farmed here? Like, do you have anything like factory farms in Russia?
Yes, I know that it's organic.
It's organic.
About eggs, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think if you have a chance to like eat something that's like grown at home, if you have like eggs that your chickens in your backyard grow, like I think you should take advantage of that. You know where it comes from. That's like one of the things the organic movement really stresses, is knowing where your food comes from. So, like, because you can't really rely on the labeling of food in America. People like try to grow their own gardens in their backyard and keep chickens. They know where these things come from. They know that they're safe. So I think that girl's lucky. She should eat her eggs. Yeah, that's one of the problems, that cows and other animals are not fed what they're naturally supposed to be eating, so it's not very healthy. But it makes them get fat faster.
As I understood from your clinic, which was there is a great growing of soybeans and USA.
Yeah, I think I don't know much about like which products are grown more than others, but I think soybeans are one of soybeans and corn in general are just grown a lot in America because they go into a lot of different products. Like a lot of processed foods have corn and soybeans. Yeah, no, you're right.
There could be some diseases for people if they won't eat natural meat or natural vegetables, for example.
Right. I mean, I think most people don't eat only soybeans, but there definitely is a problem that soybeans and corn go into a lot of different products in America. So a lot of things in America are corn-based, especially. You hear about the corn more often. So we have this thing called high fructose corn syrup. Have you ever heard of that? Basically, high fructose corn syrup is an artificial sweetener. Or not an artificial sweetener, sorry. It's just it's not like natural like sugar though. It's processed. So I'm not very clear on the science of it, but basically it's like a scientific process that creates this sweetener, and it's not very good for you because do you know anything about like glycemic index and like how you like burn calories? Okay, so you know what diabetes is? Diabetes. Do you all know what I mean? But like basically it's just like disease where it's difficult for a person who has diabetes to kind of regulate their sugar levels. So if their sugar levels are too high, they get very weak. Or if they're very low, they get too weak, and if they're high, then something bad happens then too. I don't know a lot about it. But basically, you have something called a glycemic index. So your sugar levels are supposed to be at a certain level. So they're supposed to kind of fall back to a certain level. But things like high fructose corn syrup make your glycemic index like kind of shoot up really high and come down again really fast. So you get a sugar high and then you fall really quickly. So it's just not healthy for you to be like bouncing all over the place. The new glycemic index basically with other foods it's a much more steady incline and decline. So things like high fructose corn syrup are really not good for you. And unfortunately they're present in a lot of different processed foods. So generally some people who are aware of this try to completely avoid processed foods because corn sneaks into it all the time in products that are derived from corn, like high fructose corn syrup. So anyway, you're right, things like corn and soy are used a little bit too often. They're in too many things in the places where they shouldn't be. That's another problem that I didn't really get into in this, but it's also an issue in America.
So what's your opinion? Why people eat such foods when although they know that it's harmful for them or their health?
Well, I think not everyone is educated that this is harmful to them. So it's like movies and books like this that are starting to educate people. So people go out there and create these documentary films or write these books and inform people. Without things like this, I wouldn't know about it either. And so I think the issue is a lot of people just aren't educated about it. They haven't found out about this. And some people just don't care. Some people don't really realize the effects. Like they've heard, like, oh yeah, you're not supposed to eat that, like genetically modified things probably aren't good for you, but they still go and eat them because it's just easier and it's cheaper. So again, like I said, there's also that economic concern. It's hard for people to spend all that money on organic food when it's easier for them to just buy like the cheaper stuff. They don't really know where it comes from. So people who aren't as educated and don't really realize some of the problems that are associated with eating foods like that, or foods that are problems that are potentially associated with it, are just going to go buy those foods because it's cheaper, or because they just have no other option. Right, yeah, exactly. The shops are full of foods like that. So some people don't even have access to a store where they can buy organic food. So, like, I live in the Northeast, which is like a very organically inclined area. Like, a lot of people understand these problems, and a lot of people, want to eat organic food. So that food is available to us. I think somewhere like in the Midwest, where a lot of these foods, a lot of genetically modified foods are produced. I'm not sure if it's easy to buy organic food there. I don't know because I've never done it, but I'm pretty sure it's easier where I live. So it's easy for me to say, like, everyone should eat organic food, but some people might not have an option.
Organic foods, when they get new it's really organic food, but it was transported and anyway,
And did you think it might have chemical anyway? Organic food? Because in the transportation process? I guess it's possible that might happen, but I think generally the regulations on organic food are really strict. So that kind of thing generally won't happen. Like a lot of organic food is grown on a very small scale because without the pesticides, it's really hard to grow on a large scale. You can't have a huge farm and grow it organically usually because it's just too difficult. So you need to have people out there like weeding themselves and weeding. So it takes more manual labor. That's one reason that organic food is more expensive because you have to get people out there taking care of the crops by hand. You can't just spray things on them, and because of that, you need to have smaller farms. So generally, these small farms are able to kind of like collect all of their food themselves and like sell them at farmers markets or sell them into a supermarket directly. It's all transported together. So I wouldn't be too worried about chemicals getting on them. I think there are also regulations about how close, how close you can be to farms that do use non-organic methods, because those chemicals could get around to your crops, right? And then also there's a regulation about how many years. So like if you buy a piece of land to become a farm, so I guess pretend there's like a farm and it's been used non-organically. So people have been spraying pesticides there for years. So then you buy this farm and you want it to be organic. You have to wait a certain number of years, and the soil samples have to be clean before you're allowed to get your certification as an organic farm. So they're pretty strict regulations to make sure that this food is actually organic. So it's the one good labeling thing that we have in America. Have any other questions or comments or opinions?